Moderator for the session. Please put your hands together for Dr. Rahul Tongia, Senior Fellow, CSEP. Can we have his introduction slide? I mean, everyone knows him, but yeah. Would you like to invite him? Okay. So over to Dr. Tongia for, I invite him? Okay. So, would like to now invite our other panelists. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Anand Ganapathy Chennira. He is the Chief Strategy Officer, Sun Mobility. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to now invite Mr. Krishna Sharma, Vice President and Business Head, EVSE, Exicom, Telesystems Limited. Thank you, Mr. Sharma, for joining us. And next panelist, we have Mr. Jyotiranjan Harichandan, co-founder and CEO of Bolt. Welcome, Mr. Harichandan. Thank you so much for joining us. And with that, I would like to hand over the stage to Dr. Tongia to take up the discussion forward.
Thank you, Reena. Thank you, ISGF and BESCOM, for hosting these discussions. It's my pleasure to not only moderate the session, but really come to the heart of an important issue, which is the economics, the business model. Because people say, oh, I want to be green. And then you ask them, are you willing to pay a premium to be green? Well, that's not the only thing to think about. There's many other factors, from the service that vehicles can provide you, the value proposition, and so forth. Yesterday, we had a long and in-depth discussion on the challenges of setting up the infra for charging. And I won't attempt to summarize, but a few key points that came out. One size does not fit all. And we know that cliche, but specifically here you have different levels of charging which have different voltage or energy requirements, wattage or kVA. You have different use cases. Not only vehicle types, two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler, buses, trucks are not the same, but also individual owner, fleet owner, public usage, etc. Second, some of the challenges the ecosystem faces were things that are in the teething stages. Issues of land, issues of power quality, so good quality supply, and that too quickly. Now, here we're talking about a technology. So if somebody says that I'm running a business being an EV charging company, well, the question becomes, is that profitable? Is that scaling? Or is this part of a larger ecosystem play? Think of Tesla, the company that really put EVs on the roadmap, at least in part of the world. The US, I mean, China has had different models, but for the US, which also has parlays into the Europe, Tesla set up its own charging infrastructure, and they call them superchargers. Because people were thinking kilowatts, they went into tens of kilowatts, crossing 100 kilowatts, and for a little while they made it free. They said, look, you buy your Tesla. Here's a network across the country, and by the way, it's free. And so this question of business models, the title here says EV charging / swapping. We'll sort of hopefully understand the complementarity of some of these, because I don't want to get into a debate of, do we need swapping as a mandate? Well, let the market evolve that. I'll close with one opening thought, and hopefully in the discussions we will get to issues of standards. But the question really becomes, is charging meant to be a commodity? Because if it's a commodity, then the only thing you're competing upon is price. Think of Wi-Fi. Do any of you think what Wi-Fi hardware costs? How many of you rely on Wi-Fi? Lots of us. Yeah. And even your mobile phone has Wi-Fi built in. Laptops have it built in. You don't pay extra. It's built into the chips. It's in fact embedded onto the some of the other chips. But when Wi-Fi started, Some of my colleagues were involved. 2 Mbps was the speed, and it was $800 for Wi-Fi. And now it is 100 plus 500 Mbps, depends on the Wi-Fi 6. Uh, and it's almost free. It's $1 or $2 cost. So now when we come to charging, everyone says we want interoperability of the ecosystem. Now that loose statement, what does that mean? So if somebody builds an app and they want to be able to figure out where do I charge, should that app talk to every service provider, every charging company? At what layer do we expect interoperability? This is a question that smart meters face. This is a question that the internet grappled with. And the internet solution to open standards was a layered approach. You have different layers of architecture of the internet. The top layer doesn't need to care what happens below, as long as they know the protocols with which they speak and they can interoperate. Now here I'm not just talking about technology in a stack basis, but now the payment side as well. When I talk about business models, where is the financial stack and how does that play out? Because that is another key aspect. Because now are we expecting a world where we need back-end relationships? So my app talks to his hardware, which talks to that service provider, which talks to this payment gateway. Is that the world we see ahead? So again, evolving issue. And with these opening thoughts, I wanted to change the order around and request Mr. Harichandan to give a few minutes opening remarks, which would then leave us time for more discussion. Do you have a presentation or just discussion? Just discussion. Excellent. Can we get one more mic, please? Okay. Thank you. This one's not working.
Hello. Yeah, hi. Thanks for the statement actually and wide array of questions. So we are a startup and I'm the co-founder of Bold. So we think like probably in the future, sometime later, every vehicle which is sold will be sold with a charging point. It will more or less become a commodity, and we have to prepare for a world like that. And either ways, I think 95% of the time when you install a charger or a general socket at your place to charge your vehicle, you'll not be using it to charge your vehicle. If we can share it with others and help build the infrastructure at scale, then that is something which is going to solve the problem of basically charging for a majority of the people. Obviously, there is DC fast charging and other standards which are there. But what we think is that it is going to evolve where every place, every shop, every restaurant, every apartment, every office would need a lot of charging points, because every vehicle is going to be electric. And if you look at the number of vehicles in India currently, that's roughly about 200 million vehicles, including two-wheelers. And if in the next, let's say 10, 15 years, all of them move to electric, you would need similar number of charging points. So the best way to kind of solve all of this is to basically make a very commoditized hardware which can be shared between each other. And for specific dedicated use cases, like such as highway travel or something where we need DC fast chargers, those things can be operated at a CPO-owned model, where we will need to define basically pretty good business models. And as you rightly said, we would be evolving to a standard where there would be interoperability between all the players, including the hardware manufacturer, the app makers, and the CMS providers. But I think currently we are still at day zero in this, and especially in India, we are at day, let's say 0.5 or something like that. So over the next 2-3 years, we see that a lot of standards evolving on this. And in fact, we are also part of those committees which are defining some of these standards. I think the best way to now do it is basically making sure that all these chargers are smart and safe and allowing every citizen to become a part of the solution, because that is something which has not been tapped into. Everyone who buys a EV is basically evangelist as on date, uh, or are looking to save some cost and generate some additional income. If we're enabling them to share their own installed chargers to basically everybody who wants to just do a top up or something, I think majority of the problems will be solved with that use case itself. And only for some key real estates and highway travels and some other places we would need to deploy infrastructure and have government investment or subsidized rates or something like that. Because every consumer, what we have seen is he wants convenience. He will not travel 1 kilometer to charge his vehicle also. If provided with a facility to charge at his home or at his office or at wherever he parks his vehicle, he will just charge there. So what we are doing at Bolt is kind of enabling them to share it between other people so that they can have some monetization of that asset and help somebody else who's in the need of that charge to kind of tap into this charging station and basically get rid of range anxiety. And that's how we have been able to scale to somewhere around 15,000 chargers deployed across India, and out of which I think majority of them, 90% of them are about AC level 1 chargers. But I think this is what is scaling, and there is a lot of utilization also. Probably in a day we are doing a few thousand charges. In a month we are generating somewhere around tens of thousands of dollars of revenue on top of this, and all uh, people basically providing solutions to some other people who are in need to charge, right? So that is what I would like to basically start my conversation with. I'll hand over the mic to other panelists.
Thank you very much. I think the first point, of course, which is always sobering, is the scale of the issue. You know, you talk of hundreds of millions of vehicles, which not today, but over the next 10, 15-ish years are going to evolve or replacement into electric. The second point I think is very valuable for us to remember. As part of this one size doesn't fit all, most of the people, in terms of number of vehicles, are going to use trickle charging at sort of either personal or shared or non-public charging infra, not like dedicated new build. There'll be sort of not accidental, but add-on sort of charging model, because parking and location are one of the key issues for this going forward. So we'll come back to some of these details in just a second. If I could now request Mr. Sharma to please share his views.
Thank you, Rahul. So I just add one thing here. While we talk about different levels of charging, for example, uh, there are three levels which I can differentiate very well, and two of them are very well planned as of now. The third one remains an anxiety even today, whether this is economically viable or profitable over a period of time. So first is captive charging, like some fleet operators or any uh, community which has already planned their usage of charger, and based on the availability of vehicles coming across for the charging infrastructure. That is one which is even today, like Mr. Harichandan said, that they have utilization more than 70-80%, so that's very good. But that is one area of application where we can see the utilization is to that much extent. Second is your depot charging. So I'm talking about the higher levels of four-wheeler and commercial vehicles, where charging utilization can even be defined for 70-80%, or even sometimes above 90% also, in especially in depot charging, where night charging is planned and buses operation is planned as per the rather the other way around, the charging infra is planned as per the plying of the buses. So there we can see the complete sense of investment of deployment of charging infrastructure and utilization, and even going forward to look at being profitable in this business. The, the basic charging infra which we talk about could be two-wheeler, four-wheeler segment having a destination charging, whether this is capped in the vehicle, which can be utilized while you are initiating. You can look at the infrastructure at the home, like, home charger. So there are two types of charger. Every vehicle, especially passenger car vehicle, they give us is a little bit a basic charging, a level 2 charging, and the level 3 charging. Could be of AC type 2, which is an international standard also. So any vehicle supporting that can be put onto that. So that is one. This is kind of overnight charging. So the utilization low, if it is low, but it is consistent, and it calls for a justification of that investment. The gray area where we are talking or concerned about the public charging. So in public charging, there are a lot of applications. There are a lot of standards of charging, like it could be AC 001, DC 001, AC type 2, and CCS charging as of now. And in some extent, it could be GB by T also, but that's very limited, only in some cases of buses. So these buses are, especially I can talk about Tata Motors, they are on GB by T only. Otherwise, all of them has already converted or shifted to CCS. So public charging infra, which is, mainly into public areas, they are really struggling to justify the utilization, as well as I cannot see, at least during a lot of discussions we have discussed this point, whether this PPO model coming into public charging infra is at all money making or profitable. So that remains a challenge. So I think earlier we, overcome one challenge when, after FAME 1, there was a chicken and egg story. We talked for a long time, 4 or 5 years, and then it was a clear mandate that, okay, we invest into charging infra, and by virtue of, having support from government, and especially to mention DHI, funding the investment required for charging infrastructure. But that charging infrastructure is utilized for less than 5%. So that is one which we should not, overlook. How long we will keep on investing into charging infra without justifying the utilization, without justifying the profitable business there.
Thank you. This issue of capacity utilization is probably one of the key ones, which links to the use case and where it is, whose it is, etc. I'll come back to some of the questions that are obvious from your statements, but just an observation that if we do utilize a segment, an infra more, it is more likely that there could be a potential conflict with which greenness of the charging you would have. So solar, as we know, is time dependent for being roughly 10 to 3 p.m. 10 morning to 3 p.m., about 5 hours. Now the question is, obviously vehicles may not be stationary at that point. So this is one of the things. In fact, there is an entire session dedicated to the greenness of charging. So I won't get into it too much, but the larger observation is all of these issues are linked. You cannot solve just one aspect of it and not expect implications on other aspects of this ecosystem. With that, thank you. I would like to turn to Mr. Chennira, if you could share some opening remarks.
I have a question for the audience. Suppose you were driving 100 kilometers a day. Let's presume it's on a bike. Okay. You had a choice of one bike which cost 90,000 rupees. You had a choice of another bike which costs about 50,000 rupees. Which one would you pick? 50, right? Now, why do I bring this up? We're talking about swapping and we're talking about charging. In the charging ecosystem, you own the battery
which means if you own a bike, you're going to pay about 90,000 plus minus. In the swapping ecosystem, you don't own the battery. So for 50,000, you get the bike. The battery belongs to the service provider and you just swap. Do any of you own the gas cylinder that is used at home? No, you just pay for the service. My point here is there are use cases for charging, there are use cases for swapping, right? And both make a lot of sense. I am here from Sun Mobility. Sun Mobility is what Chetan Maini started. The vehicles that I've worked on swapping today, we have done 35 million kilometers across India, right? I see this when people talk, there was a question from the audience on why is the offtake of EV not yet high? The simple answer is segment target position. There are certain segments that have taken off. If you look at two-wheelers and three-wheelers, for the B2B segment, it has gone up tremendously. But if you look at, let's say, the B2C bikes, it is picking up, it will take time, and the cars will take much, much longer. So from business models, if I sit back and think, the government giving us a subsidy is a seed. The government giving us a subsidy can't be a solution. So I think we've had certain members of the panel tell us that we need to make sure that it is economically viable, which means if you put up something with or without standards, we'll talk about it, it must start making money. It must start making money and it must make money as it goes through. So my submission for us to think through from both charging and swapping is both have places. There are use cases where it makes sense for one and it may not make sense for the other. And over a window of time, both of them will continue to coexist.
Thank you. So you essentially flagged off this issue of looking at the ecosystem where you want to decouple the battery from a total sort of vehicle cost. And if you treat it as a service, yes, that is one world where, you know, people talk of software as a service, storage as a service, so many aspects. Now, for this decoupling, combining questions to both of you and opening it up to everyone, can we get a sense of where the costs are across two dimensions? First is in your vehicle. You said 90,000 versus 50,000. How does that change whether it's a two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler, etc.? And at one extreme, it shouldn't matter. It's like renting versus buying. There's an equilibrium. You can do either. And they should, in fact, give you the same present value, risk-adjusted, assuming supply-demand are in equilibrium. Again, big assumption. So here what we're doing is really opening up the upfront. But now the flip side is, if you decouple, there are questions on quality and lifespan, in the sense that, am I opening it up to a swapping that's completely non-commoditized, meaning it's only one battery type, one manufacturer, one provider who may have 10 locations or Amazon or apps, or what's happening? And the complement to that is also from the charging infra. How much of your costs go for the hardware, the land, the electricity? So if you say it's a 10 to 12 rupee per kilowatt hour public charging, that's obviously more than the electricity, which is typically around 5 rupees for EVs. So help us get a sense of these things, because that can also help us understand where do we tweak the policies or the business models. Just at a high level, we obviously don't want to debate the economics, but any thoughts towards these issues? Opening it up to everyone, yeah.
From an economics perspective, it's simple. I'm going to start with a B2B. If you, and again, I keep referring to this segment because this is what has taken off. I'm not talking about four-wheelers. We're not talking about that for now. We can come back to that later.
Sir, one question.
Please.
You asked regarding 90,000 and 50,000, the vehicle modules.
Yes, sir.
In your experience, what is the life cycle of those two vehicles? Is it the same or different? First point. Second point, what is the cost component of a battery in 90,000 and 50,000? Third question, you ask the ecosystem, charging ecosystem and battery swapping, both are different domains. Charging battery swapping, if it comes, the charging infrastructure will definitely it will go down, slow down. Okay, these are all the 3 points, initial points. You please give me your opinion on costing of the battery fitted in those two variants. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. To answer the question, and it's a very valid question, right? If I take exactly the same vehicle, if I take, let's assume, without naming an OEM, take any of India's top Hero, Bajaj, any of the top OEMs, the exact same vehicle could be running with a fixed battery, could be running with a swappable battery, the exact same vehicle. So the life of the vehicle technically will be the same. And we have seen this, Exicom will attest to this. Now, it doesn't matter from a customer's perspective. I'm only thinking as a customer. Our primary motivation is how much will it cost? Is it safe? Range. We spoke about range. The battery cost in any vehicle, in a two-wheeler, for example, can range anywhere from 40% to 60%. And charging, both of them have place. And today, sir, you mentioned that the rise of one will lead to the fall of the other. Definitely not. We had numbers which said we have about 200 to 300 million vehicles running today in India. If I look at just two-wheelers, we sell anywhere between 15 to 20 million two-wheelers every year in India. About that. Last year, it was about 250,000, let us say 300,000 electric two-wheelers. Even if we grow 5 times, right, it will be less than, it's a very small percentage of the ICE market. So both swapping and charging will grow. The cost is in the 50% range. I think it helps customers get a choice. Suppose somebody wants an expensive vehicle with a fixed battery, which looks very nice, it will cost more.
I will tell you one
Yes, sir.
to supplement your point. Between these two, the charging station and infrastructure and the swapping, there is one more layer which is the private charging that is not picked up in India. When once the two-wheeler, when the private charging, the owner itself charges, then the dimensions will be different. Then one will go down and another will come up. The battery swapping now, there is a anxiety issue. Range anxiety issue is there with respect to public charging stations, because you cannot see public charging stations, especially in metro cities across the India. You see in New Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore to per se. These are all the gray areas of public charging stations. If private charging station with respect to two-wheeler comes up, he will be having his own charging infrastructure in his home only. It will the demand response. The earlier session, the speakers were telling regarding the demand response. Even our distribution network, the system is already suffice these issues. The demand and response, it is already imbibed with respect to the charging, EV charging component. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Just one comment on that. What you're saying is exactly right, and I go back. There are different segments. Let's assume I'm a Zomato or a Swiggy rider. Every day I do 120 kilometers on a bike. Any bike which costs about 60,000 to 70,000 rupees plus minus does not give me a range of more than 50 kilometers. So I have two options. One, after I finish 50 kilometers, charge it and wait for 4-5 hours for it to charge. Second, I have an option of swapping it, where I just go, swap and move. If I am an office person, I don't do more than 50 kilometers a day. The fixed charging is absolutely fine. If I'm a Zomato or a Swiggy rider, I need the swapping, at least for now. Right? So both will continue to live, it'll work.
Thank you, sir.
Did you have a follow-up? No. Did you have a follow-up? Okay, so this is one aspect. The other aspect, of course, in the previous session, in addition to range anxiety, people worry about standards. Now, let's talk about one of the elephants in the room. In India, we have a range of potential charging heads or guns. And do we see that as a bottleneck? Because if I want to, let's say I'm a shop. You talked about this model where if I go to a store, especially one with parking, then it would be nice that I could just plug it in there, give me 1 hour of charging, or even half an hour, top up. It's got a value, and quite frankly, for that, whether he charged me 10 rupees or 12 rupees is not going to be a deciding factor when normally parking itself is 100 rupees for 2-3 hours. So that's not the bottleneck there. But now, if from a developer ecosystem perspective, do we have any sense of should or could, or will the market speak what types of guns we need, what types of protocols, what types of technology are part of this? Is this something that will get sorted out soon? Because this is currently still an issue.
Thanks for that question. Actually, what we were mentioning, one size doesn't fit all here applies in this case also, and specifically for 2 and 3 wheelers. Recently, only India has kind of developed a standard and is publishing that. And for 4 wheelers, the standards are much more from the Western countries where the adoption has been much higher. The standards are already defined, whether it is a level 2 charger, GBT, or a CCS2. Majority of the standards are already defined, and that gives us in India opportunity to kind of decide this, because whatever we decide is going to be implemented in majority of the other countries as well in emerging markets, which includes Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America as well, because these are the countries where 2 and 3 wheelers, much like India, are being used, right? So what we have seen in our experience is that like before this standard came out, and in fact right now also, majority of the 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers have the standard 3-pin 16 amp 6 amp sockets. And our job in the first 2 years of our company was to ensure how do we make them safer and smarter and kind of decentralized in terms of the deployment. When I am like, for example, when we are saying that we are going to a shop where there is a parking, and if he wants to put a EV parking charging point there, he would say that this has to be compatible with every vehicle, whether it is a 2-wheeler coming in, 3-wheeler coming in, or a 4-wheeler coming in right now, not 2 years, 3 years down the line. So our first job as a startup essentially was to kind of figure out how do we make it safer. And obviously, when the standards are evolving, like we had in our smartphones, which was a good example, we had Type B cable when it came in 2010, 2012. Now all the smartphones have a Type C cable. So similar, I think in Europe they have already forced Apple's hand on that. Yeah, but I think those things will follow essentially, and like maybe there would be a few outliers like Apple who would have their own, let's say, standards or whatever, but majority of the OEMs would start following a similar standard, and I think it will evolve over the next 2 to 4 years where we will have a standardization, and this question will be out of the this thing, and either ways we would have standard converters also. So from your Type B to Type C, we still have the converters which can be able to charge, right? So in the charging ecosystem, we see that whatever the infrastructure we or anybody else is putting out right now would be able to be upgraded at a very low cost or with a standard accessory to a higher version also. So I think this chicken and egg problem would not kind of lead us anywhere. What we have to do, at least as a charge point provider, is that helping the consumers out who are adopting EVs right now. They are facing the pinch. In fact, I myself have been using EV vehicles for more than 5-6 years now, and that's how I got the idea when I had to push my vehicle for 2 kilometers to 3 kilometers, because nobody was willing to basically allow me to charge, because you can just plug it in any socket and it will be kind of charging in 30-40 minutes to at least to reach my home. And that was not the case about 4 or 5 years back, when I was kind of stuck somewhere between I think SP Road and HSR layout, and had to drag my bike for 3-4 kilometers, and that's the day I realized that there has to be a better way to solve this.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. On this issue of, you gave the interesting example of adapters and interoperability, like you can convert A type into C type on your mobile phone. From a technology perspective, Mr. Sharma, is that feasible? So is it possible that you could make this modular, that if I'm traveling intercity where I'm more worried, then I could just borrow or pick up or rent an adapter or an extra hardware or something that lets me plug into more types, or otherwise I'm stuck with at most sort of onboard charging, lower speed. Is that technologically available today?
Yeah, there are two aspects to it. We can talk about from the regulatory perspective, safety perspective, and the technologically possible or not. So yes, technically it is possible. However, regulatory authorities, they do not allow that conversion from one standard to the other. Like suppose if charger has got socket or a gun which is of CCS, and you want to convert that into GBT or vice versa, it's technically possible. You know, technically it means we have emergence of technology from bullock carts to now IoT based vehicles. So technically I don't see anything which is not feasible, which is not achievable. Anything
practical, not just practical, but practical.
Practically, see, there are different modes of communication in each industry. Standards like CCS, they are PLC based, GBT,
yeah.
they are CAN based. So still I can see if technically if I see, then I sometime or the other time I will be able to achieve that conversion. But this other aspect, the other aspect is safety. So safety of these things, we are very sensitive, and I think this is not allowed as per the regulatory authorities to convert to some or the other type of adapter as of now. So only thing, right from beginning we have seen the adoption of certain standards in India also. Earlier, Niti Aayog, BIS and DHI, they decided to go with different kind of standards. That was Bharat specific standard. It was a kind of joint of adoption from China specific standard, that was GBT, but with low voltage standard. So GBT normally global standard or even China specific standard calls for 300 volt to say now 1000 volt DC system, but we adopted in India GBT with less than 100 volt. And other one was AC charger standard, which was specifically, it was just an industrial socket and anybody can use. And other side of the vehicle, the vehicle side, it was not defined. So it could be mode 1 or mode 2. Both were possible with the AC001. Even today, we are using that for two-wheeler and three-wheeler charging. While, it was meant for initially four-wheeler from Tata and Mahindra, the earlier vehicles were on Bharat specific standard. Then we clearly adopted CCS and CHAdeMO for public charging infra. However, it was not defined for captive charging. So in the depot operations, buses were free to adopt anything. So there were two standards and it's still going on. Tata is still on GBT. Our others have already shifted onto CCS. Tata is also working on conversion onto CCS now. Volvo Eicher is also clearly saying that they will also convert into CCS. So there is a clear visibility that the entire standard, at least for four-wheeler, will be onto CCS. But the same thing is not applicable for the two-wheeler and three-wheeler. Still, We are awaiting that policy, which is, as of now, I can say it is long-awaited policy, which could have been defined because in terms of number of vehicles, we own at least 70% two-wheeler, three-wheeler, and 30% is four-wheeler population. So we should adopt that standardization at the first hand at the two-wheeler level first in charging. As of now, it is a level 1 or level 2 charging. I don't foresee that it is more of regulated or, clear-cut, in terms of defined category of charging. Different OEMs like Hero MotoCorp, TVS Motors, or Ather, they have gone for their own captive charging, their own standards of charging. So it is not feasible in a long term, like even Hero MotoCorp and Ather, under one umbrella, they are also getting charged with a different standard. So two-wheeler policy of standardization is a must now. I think we can expect this very soon, but I think it is long delayed. So interoperability in terms of charging, interoperability in terms of your first concern, which we were talking about, that CPO level, because my app should also give, charging points, which is on another platform. And third thing is a kind of like what we see in the telecom operations, like I need not to worry about whether I'm jumping from Airtel network to Idea Vodafone network. So when I'm traveling interstate, so probably it would be a different platform itself. So that kind of standardization or that kind of interoperability is expected now.
So I think so. One of the things I'm learning or hearing is these are slightly evolving, but there is a coalescence around certain limited standards, and the standards will emerge. Now, let's assume the technology problem is solved. Coming back to the business model side. Now, I'm still a little trying to figure out that where is the money? Like, where is the lack of money also? Because this is a scaling problem. This is not a early adopter problem. You take the fleet. You take a, last mile delivery, a Swiggy or a IKEA. For them, it's a no-brainer. They know their kilometers. A bus knows it's going to run. Not only does it know it's going to run, it knows how many kilometers it's expected to run. You can optimize your battery size with a margin very easily for these. The problem is not this first leg. So this is the good news, bad news syndrome. The good news is there's enough work to be done for the next 10 years just handling these early adopters. But for the larger scale, the numbers that you talked about, we have to go beyond these early adopters to some of these other problems. So where is this gap? And coming to the business model, if someone can share any thoughts about the land problem. Well, you go to a store. We don't park at that store. Typically, we park wherever we find it within 10-minute walk in many cases. So now are we coming back to a world that mandates public charging, like from France has attempted street lamps? The road is where electricity is there, lighting systems are there. Do these players have to come in for that second rung of public charging? Any thoughts?
I think two things, and I'm tying up 2 points. One, we spoke about standardization, and then tying it to this, because that question has come many times. We spoke about telephones, right? For us to withdraw money from an ATM or to have our roaming has taken 10 years. It's taken time, and the consumer has chosen. If in a nascent industry, we force certain standardization, and we are saying there's a difference between standards and standardization. At home, all of y'all use batteries, AAA, AA, D. It's not one, right? There are 3 standards, but you have those. And each of them will serve a certain use case. Imagine we were all forced to use just one type of battery, one shape, one form, the such. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I can definitely tell you batteries now have been in evolution for so long. In the EV world, which is evolving, if we force any standardization, we will kill innovation. That is 100% true. But it also means if we put consumer at the center and say safety is the most important, and we want interoperability, a whole host of standards where then the customer chooses, which then becomes standardization. We had the Apple example. Many of us will still choose the Apple iPhone. Many of us might choose the Android system. The customer is choosing. Give the customer choice, make it safe, it'll evolve. And if it doesn't work out economically, I'm addressing your point, there'll be no company that will choose to get into it. Okay, because it cannot run on a government subsidy. It might be a large firm that might choose to take over the market, which then becomes a monopoly. Innovation from a startup, perhaps smaller companies which are going to be innovative would not exist at all. So my submission is, if we make sure that it's economically going to work, maybe with a kick of an incentive today, but which will work equally well without, and standards leading to standardization over a window of time, we are in a very, very good place.
I think I'll agree to that. I think like I was telling earlier, that we are still at day 0 to 1. If we start basically pushing everybody to kind of have interoperable standards right now, I think majority of the startups or even the bigger companies would not even enter the market right now. So the thing is, we are looking at an adoption of less than 1% probably across India, and saying should we standardize it, whereas there are multiple players, and even we are ourselves as a startup collaborating and discussing with other startups and even some of the larger companies to integrate between the systems. But I think it's a job which has to be done in the next 2 to 4 years rather than right now, because nobody understands what it takes to kind of build the network. Even like for startups, the business models are also evolving as we scale and as we see the consumer move to basically EVs. So I think we are still very early to kind of push standardization on basically all the aspects, whether it is swapping or charging. I think some places where it is already standardized, like four-wheelers, it's kind of taking off, and majority of the OEMs have also adhering to the standards. But for early basically places like two-wheelers and three-wheelers, these are still under discussions, and we are also kind of contributing our own thoughts to this process. And even the same companies sometimes follow different standards. Like their older bike would have a set of basically charging port, and the newer bike, newer variant of the same model will have a different port. So we are still very early in these stages, and I think over the next 2 to 4 years is somewhere we think there will be a lot of standardization across the industry also.
So that's an important thing, and it's this iterative sort of learning process that brings together technologies, consumers, standardization, standards to lead to a standardization. We have questions. I know we are Q&A is now the only thing between us and lunch, but we do want to have time for questions. We have online questions, but I'll first open it up to our audience here. Are there any questions for our panelists on the business model side? Before you, sir, just 1 second, since you've had an opportunity, if I could just give the opportunity for, was there a question in the back? Sir, yeah.
No, it is open.
Please.
My question to all the panelists, because academicians are there and startup and other learned OEMs and etc. Is there any maturity model evolved across the globe, or you are following here before starting this startup with respect to batteries, charging, adaptability, maturity model like we have in smart grid, maturity model of 0 to 5,
It is available for all stakeholders across the globe for smart grids. Like that, have you offered any maturity models as on date? Because still for two-wheelers, there is no standardization. It is not a big thing for standardization. It draws very lesser current and charging time also less. I don't know what is the intricacy in standardization with respect to. Of course, for four-wheelers, I agree. The battery, the other components should have a standardization. There is a standardization with respect to European standards or with respect to Indian standards. What is the problem or gray area in not achieving the standards as set for two-wheelers? These are all the important points. Then only the boom will take place in two-wheeler. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. If I may take that.
Please.
Thank you. Great question. And here's my approach to your answer. Before Sun Mobility, I used to lead investments for a gentleman called Shibulal, who was one of the co-founders of Infosys. We had looked at 400 EV startups in India, right? So my answer comes from there. If I ask the audience, how many four-wheeler startups are there in India today? And how many two- and three-wheeler startups are there in India? That gives you your answer. The number of two-wheeler and three-wheeler startups in India today are more than 150. Number of four-wheeler, new four-wheeler, I don't mean the established OEM, are less than 5. The innovation is coming from there. I mean, it's a great boost for India while we as consumers may not see it. And Ather is a product of young kids from here who actually built it at IIT Madras, and it's a great product. I'm not advocating an Ather. I'm sure there are many other products, but that's a startup which is competing against established players. That innovation could not happen if they were forced to, go there. That is an answer to you because the OEMs, sir, in the four-wheelers have already got certain things. Incidentally, none of them have built a four-wheel form factor grounds up. Tesla is an EV which is built grounds up. Most of the four-wheeler, even what we have here today, is an ICE vehicle modified to an EV. The EV two-wheelers and three-wheelers, many of them are built grounds up. Which is why when you spoke about, a 0 to 5.
I agree. Tesla is having a maturity model. That's why it is booming. And two-wheelers also. It is not a great innovation for charging two-wheeler. As an electrical professional, it is just plug and charge. Plug and charge concept, it will come. There is no standardization.
Tesla started in 2003. We are now talking 19 years later saying something, which we need that time.
Thank you.
So just a quick observation. Capability maturity models like SGMM, CMM are about your process. They do not tell you anything about your product or standard. So this is like ISO. I do not have it, but I show it in many of my talks. I can show you in India an ISO 9001 certified astrologer. Question? Yeah. 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Harichandan. I have completed a MCOM in 2019. Now I have difference. I should know difference between swapping and stationing. What will be the cost difference between, sir? Cost between this one station and swapping.
Cost to whom? To the consumer?
In point of 2 years, sir. If I become businessman, if I start the business, in the case of station or swapping, which will be the less for me as per business point? Another one, as per customer point, what will be the cheaper point?
I think that's your cup of tea.
So 2 answers. If you were an entrepreneur and you wanted to start a new business,
Yes, sir.
my advice to you is to have a station which has both. You know why? Because you've got to maximize it. There'll be certain, there are definite use cases for charging. There are definite use cases for swapping.
Okay.
Right? You definitely have to do that. And your cost outlay would be plus minus anywhere from the 5 lakh to 25 lakh range, depending on how you wanted to do it. Your returns, if you did it for a captive customer like an IKEA, Amazon, Flipkart, where they were your primary things and you had a fleet which provided, you'll have a utilization of over 70%. If you don't have that, don't start it for now.
Okay.
Okay. From the other question you had about what will it cost the customer?
Yes, sir.
I started with my example of that bike of 90,000 versus 50,000. Your cost of swap, right, to do 50 kilometers will be plus minus 50 rupees. And if you charge the same thing at home, it might be 50 paise. So it might be 50 paise a kilometer if you charged it at home, maybe 1 rupee a kilometer if you did a swapping.
Yes.
But initially, for what you charge at home, you'd have paid 90,000. Initially, you'd have paid 50,000 for the swap. So depending on your use case and your utilization, you would decide one or the other. I mean, it's a simple mathematical thing.
I guess the kilometers driven in CUF is one of the key variables on both sides of the equation. And I think that's one of the takeaways for the key thing. So I think what the government really should do in policies is encourage maximal CUF, whether it's through partnerships, open platforms, interoperability mandate, etc. We have a question online from Anil. So battery swapping of a service is useful, but now what about the aspect of being green? Because that's part of a consumer's both choice as well as potentially ethics or long term. What is, we actually have an entire session devoted to this on the role of renewable energy in EVs, but we're going to now focus it on the charging and so question to you. If I want to make a charging from only solar power, don't I need to double the number of batteries I need? Because if you'll have to be charging in the middle of the day, then only in the evening or late afternoon is it available for somebody to drive. How does that work? Like how much extra does it cost me to go green?
Right. I think without taking names here, we are teaming up with one of India's largest green providers here to make sure that some of our stations are completely green electrons. Okay, number one. Number two, we also realize practically, if let's say you ran a fleet, you want swapping all the time. So I cannot just focus on this. So I would have both. But where we really make money, and this is important, is through carbon credits. There was a question about, and we haven't addressed it at all, I'll leave it for later. There is data at the back end. I'm happy to run almost a charging station or a swapping station for free. If my data at the back end my valuation of my company will be that much more, the carbon credits that I generate today will be a lot.
Thank you. Can we have the mic? Yeah. Please bring in the mic if you could. Wait, just 1 second, Professor. Yeah.
This is Sagar. I also believe standard is not the good term right now because battery technology is changing.
Can you bring it closer? Yeah.
Yeah, battery technology is changing day by day. So it is very difficult if you standardize something and then next generation comes, then again you have to standardize. So let it be floated. So my question is, nobody is talking about safety because swapping station, it should be bigger than compared to any charging station. So if any incident happens, so how you are actually thinking that planning, because India is a massive, like anything comes in a massive scale. So if that massive scale starts, how you encounter this safety feature?
Excellent question. Okay, this should not sound like a pitch for Sun Mobility, but that's an answer because I happen to work there. Next time you go across Bangalore, just walk across to a Sun Mobility station, open the back. You will see from a safety perspective, every time you put a swapped battery back, I measure 148 parameters every minute in that battery. If anything is off, I'm able to quarantine that one battery, or we have 15 batteries in a dock, right? I'm able to quarantine that one, or if there's an issue, I'm able to quarantine the entire station, or In the previous thing, we had a thermal runaway, in the discussion on that. There is a fire extinguisher at the back, which we have. I'm able to cut off the entire station. Because many of our stations are at IOCL petrol bunks. We also have a sensor there, where even if the issue is from outside, okay, I'm able to sense it and cut my station down. We've got one step ahead. Gone to ARAI, spoken to them about all of this, tested everything that we have. We're going to bring out some way for all of the swapping stations. We're kind of giving them a parameter on which they can come out with safety norms. They have already done this, refining it as we speak, which could make its way to the next set of safety norms. Right now, we can't solve this for everybody, which is why we say, right, you can't have a battery either charging or swapping everywhere else. That's a short answer to your question, sir, that it has to start company by company.
So you are sensing temperature, you are sensing gas, or what you are sensing?
Okay, so there are 148 parameters that we are sensing. Voltage, ampere, and voltage current is just 2 of those, and they're sensing it from different parts of the vehicle, right? Everything else is working on the data analytics at the back end. For example, for me, it is not about seeing between two cells what is the temperature at this point in time. It is about seeing has the cell temperature risen more than 4 degrees in less than 7 minutes. Tells me, like when you use your credit cards today, suppose there is an unknown thing using at 2:30 at night. It is flagged as fraud because somewhere at the back end there's an algorithm that's figuring out. Or if it's used, you're in Bangalore predominantly and it's used in Calcutta or elsewhere. Right? The algorithm of a bank is flagging it as fraud. The same way our algorithms at the back end. Actually, Sun Mobility is not a swapping company. We are a technology-enabled energy analytics company.
So I think there's an interesting synergy possible because analytics is not just there for safety, which it can and should be, but also for efficiency. We heard in the morning, Rashi and others talking about temperature and BMS and these aspects. So you actually need smart at the financial, the ecosystem level, but also at the charging technology level. And so that is where there's, I think, room for a lot of innovation. It's still evolving. So we're getting signals that, there's one last question.
I'm Vinod. So my concern was we have a lot of battery form factors as well as the electrical specifications. So why don't
Keep it closer. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a lot of battery form factors and the electrical specifications. So why don't we limit it to set of few?
I think we've already heard the trade-off in the sense that if we standardize without the appropriate portfolio of standards, there's a trade-off. So the reason it's not done, I can tell you more easily at a generic level. One is the innovation side that we heard. The second is because the vehicles are different, there's heterogeneity. You would have to modularize it a little too much to make it usable. The same thing in a small two-wheeler all the way to a medium three-wheeler. A lot of three-wheelers are used for freight. They're not just for passengers, etc. They all have different needs. So I think the way it will happen is instead of having a whole a la carte menu of 100 items on the menu, we'll standardize on a couple of them, like 1 page worth of menu, which is probably a more easy to run restaurant than if you are forced to say that you have to have 100 items on your menu. Your point is right. The question is, and correct me if I misunderstood, we shouldn't be prematurely enforcing that because we're not quite ready for that. Is that a fair assessment?
Because when you see the mobile market, right, there's a lot of variants. Probably there might be 1,000, battery form factors, but that's a space constraint. But if you look at the EV, right, it's not a space constraint.
But it is a ratio slight constraint. I mean, heck, say you don't even have voltage standardization on a vehicle. And in fact, that's a form of innovation. People who are saying, I'm running not 400, but now 800 volt systems. That's actually superior in many ways. So similarly, if we lock in, so just by see, there's a trade-off. Today, the world has now for many years had 5 volts as a standard for electronics for a lot of bus applications. USB has been 5 volts, other things serial have been running on similar. The catch is, when it was created, 5 volts was good. Today, you actually would want lower voltage because it's more efficient at a chip level. But we're stuck with 5 volts. So that's one of the trade-offs.
And just adding to what was said, suppose you think of a KTM bike versus a super bike versus something where you're carrying load like a TVS versus just commuting. All 4 form factors you can technically work with the same batteries, but it is under optimized. So for each of these, you'll need certain things. Each of them may have 3-4 types. Like we said, instead of having 100, make it 10. Customers in the end of 2 years would have picked that will by default start becoming like a type C.
So I think the analogy is very good between battery, button cell, A, AAA, AA, etc. So if I need a super bike, I know which page of the menu or which items. You know, if I'm going to run a marathon, I don't go to the dessert section of the menu. That's the wrong, I mean, I do, but
Just one point to add to Sun Mobility. You said in your analytics about 148 key performance parameters are being tested in and analyzed. My point is, with respect to the question of our my colleague, safety of the batteries. In fact, to my understanding, the battery safety depends upon the way how the charging took place in that battery, from 0 to 80%, 0 to 100%, number of occurrences, number of charging, number of discharging, number of charging, number of discharging. That gives, because the battery on an average the life cycle is 5 years in today's environment. In that 5 year, in the aging analysis, with respect to your questions on safety, are you capturing these factors also? Is there any facilities available in your system?
So actually it starts even, I'm adding to what you said, it even starts way before that. My learned colleague from Exicom will tell us that it will start from the kind of cell that you pick, whether it's a pouch cell, cylindrical cell, right, prismatic cell, the chemistry. And it's not just saying NMC, even in NMC there are different kinds, right, or an LFP. Starting from there to the cells and how you will align these cells to make a pack. Within the pack, what kind of thermal characteristics. On top of that, what kind of BMS, right? All of this is even before the battery has gotten onto the field. I will have a gold standard. This particular battery I will check. Once it gets on the field, we will be doing this in real time and seeing degradation, because it's like a heart attack, sir. All of us could have got a test, but one of us will die. The tests have all been done. Now, in analytics, it's how do I capture that? So short answer to your question is yes. Even before we start capturing, and during it, we also capture data.
Thank you. I think there's much more that can be discussed because this is also evolving. 2 other factors in my closing point. The charging business models will also evolve because of 2 trends. One, battery's capability to charge faster is growing rapidly. And second, the size of the battery is also going to be increasing as the cost of the battery fall inevitably. If you look at the data from Tesla after 50,000 miles still has extensive charge capacity from day 0. Not because of magic. One, they do some amount of analytics to how to optimize the charging. There's active cooling. The first generation of Nissan Leaf did not have active cooling. And the second, the batteries are big enough that you're not squeezing them to death. So this is that trade-off on cost. If I want a cheap bike, not a 50,000 rupee bike, but a 60,000, I'll put a small battery. What that means is your battery will discharge every day in full. So that automatically lowers your calendar lifespan available. So these are the trade-offs that I think will evolve. I think we discussed a menu of battery technologies and business models. We'll shift to a different kind of menu with a lunch break. With that, please join me in thanking our distinguished panelists for very enriching discussions and the audience. Thank you.